I never thought that checking a bank account could feel like staring into someone else's soul. It started innocently enough, with a routine glance at our joint account late one night. A few numbers didn't add up, a transfer I didn't recognize, just a few €100, easily dismissible, yet I couldn't stop staring at the screen. My chest tightened, a low hum of unease settling in. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe a mistake, or a payment for some errand I had forgotten. But deep down I knew that feeling, the one that whispers danger in silence, was real. The next morning, I tried to act normal, carrying my coffee across the kitchen without giving any indication that my mind had been racing all night. I casually asked, "Did you make a transfer to someone recently?" She looked up from her phone, her smile effortless and polished, like sunlight reflecting off water. "Oh, probably just a small thing for a friend," she replied lightly. Her tone was calm, even pleasant, but there was something in her eyes that sent a shiver down my spine. Calculation. A practiced charm that didn't reach her gaze. I spent the day trying to dismiss it, telling myself I was overreacting. I went to work, sat in meetings, smiled at colleagues, and made decisions as if my personal life hadn't just tilted slightly. But my mind kept drifting back to that account, to the strange transfer, to the way her eyes had lingered for a second too long on my question. Trust is an easy thing to give until it slips away unnoticed. When I returned home that evening, she was waiting in the doorway with her usual warm smile, as if she had no idea anything was wrong. I poured a drink and settled onto the couch, trying to let the anxiety fade. Yet I noticed her movements, the careful way she avoided putting her purse down near me, the subtle hesitation before she answered her phone in another room. It wasn't overt, but it was enough. Enough to know she was hiding something. Curiosity overtook caution one night while she was in the shower. A folder tucked behind a row of cookbooks in her drawer caught my eye. I pulled it out gently, almost afraid to look inside. Bank statements, transfers, invoices, names I didn't recognize, everything neatly organized, every number accounted for. My heart pounded as I flipped through the documents. This was more than control. It was secrecy. It was a second life. Every line was deliberate, calculated, and hidden from me. I spent the next few days observing her carefully, quietly, as if I were rediscovering her. I noticed small changes. She kept her phone in her hand more than usual, checked it when I wasn't looking, smiled at me later than expected. Even her laughter sounded rehearsed, as if she were performing affection instead of feeling it. The trust I had placed in her, once effortless, now felt like a trap I had fallen into without knowing. Late one evening, she mentioned she was meeting a friend for dinner. I pretended not to care, reading a book in the living room while keeping an eye on her movements through the window across the street. I watched as she met a man I didn't recognize. They exchanged papers and whispered to each other, laughing lightly. Money, contracts, something hidden, vital, invisible to the world but clear to anyone who looked closely. I didn't confront her, I didn't move, I just observed. The truth, fragile yet undeniable, had revealed itself at night. Lying awake, I replayed years of trust and love. Every shared bill, every account, every moment I had handed over control without hesitation, now felt like blind faith exploited. Love doesn't prevent manipulation, it blinds you just long enough to be used. The betrayal wasn't loud or violent. It was meticulous, slow, and invisible. Over the next week, I began documenting everything I could. Transfers, payments, times, unusual purchases, hidden accounts. I wasn't seeking revenge yet. I wasn't planning confrontation. I just needed clarity. Each detail added to a growing map of a life that I hadn't known existed. And with every new discovery, the puzzle became darker, more complex, more suffocating. Even our daily interactions changed without her realizing it. I smiled at her, laughed at her jokes, complimented her cooking, all the familiar gestures, but inside, I was untangling her web of deception. I watched her carefully. I listened to the patterns of her speech, the pauses, the carefully chosen words. Each conversation became a test, and I was learning faster than she had ever expected. I remembered the first time I had trusted her completely, the blissful ignorance of early marriage, the feeling that together we were unstoppable. And now, seeing the cracks she had hidden for years, I realized just how carefully she had built a life in parallel with mine, a life I had never been meant to see. The realization hit harder than any confrontation could have. The week ended with her kissing me goodbye as she left for work. I returned the gesture, pretending that everything was normal, that I was still the man she had always known. But inside, I was awake. I had seen the first signs, uncovered the first clues. This was only the beginning, and whatever came next, I would face it with my eyes wide open. Asterisks. The days following my discovery became a delicate balance between observation and self-restraint. I could no longer look at her the same way. Every smile, every casual touch, every whispered "I love you" carried a hidden weight I could feel pressing against my chest. The apartment we had shared for years suddenly felt like a stage, and I, a performer forced to play my part while quietly unraveling the truth. I started paying closer attention to her routines. She left for work earlier than usual, claiming meetings. Yet sometimes she returned just long enough to change her outfit or grab a small bag before heading out again. She never offered explanations, and I didn't ask directly. Observation was safer. Curiosity had become my weapon, patience my shield. It wasn't just her financial control that alarmed me. It was the precision of it. Every bill was accounted for, every transaction meticulously planned, every small luxury justified as for us. Yet the accounts I found told another story entirely. Hidden investments, untraceable transfers, purchases that I had never been consulted about. She had created a parallel world in which I had no place. I began compiling notes. Late at night I sat at the kitchen table, poring over statements, spreadsheets and receipts. Each line told a story of deception and planning. Small details, all invisible, revealed her careful orchestration. I realized that she had been operating like a shadow, silently moving behind the life I thought we shared. And yet, there was no rage, no outburst, only the slow, steady pulse of awareness that gave me power she could not touch. One evening, while she was out, I decided to follow a pattern. A transfer had been made to a boutique I didn't recognize, and she had mentioned it casually as a gift for a friend. I drove past the address she had given, parked a block away, and waited hours past. Eventually she arrived, and not alone. A man accompanied her, someone I had never seen before. Their movements were casual but intimate, their laughter carefully measured. They entered the boutique together, disappearing from view. I stayed in the car, watching them, listening to the muffled sounds through the closed windows. My mind catalogued everything, the ease with which she moved in his presence, the subtle gestures that suggested familiarity far beyond friendship. I didn't confront them. I didn't need to. The truth was becoming undeniable, each piece falling into place. Returning home, I felt a strange mixture of emotions: betrayal, shock, but also a calm, almost clinical determination. This was not the time for anger. This was the time for strategy. I couldn't allow myself to be drawn into confrontation until I knew exactly what I was facing. Every decision she had made, every manipulation, had been calculated. I needed to, be equally methodical. Over the next few days, I expanded my observation. I traced more transfers, uncovered accounts hidden under other names, and noted her patterns of communication. She was careful, meticulous, but not infallible. I began piecing together a network of connections, people, businesses, small trends, pointing to someone outside our shared life. She was creating a world in which I existed only as a tool, a source of income and credibility. At work I kept up appearances. Meetings, reports, decisions, they all had to continue as if nothing had shifted. My colleagues noticed the slight tension in my demeanor but attributed it to stress or fatigue. Only I knew the truth. A quiet storm was brewing in my personal life, one that required patience, caution, and meticulous planning. One night, she returned from a supposed dinner with friends. I noticed immediately the faint scent of perfume that wasn't hers, the subtle disarray of her hair that suggested someone had been near her. She smiled at me, kissed me softly on the cheek, and asked about my day. I answered with practiced calm, asking about her evening without revealing my knowledge. The most dangerous power is awareness, and I wielded it silently. I began preparing my own contingency. I opened discreet accounts, documented everything, and planned legal steps to protect myself without alerting her. Each move was invisible, subtle, deliberate. She had assumed control over our finances, our schedules, our lives, but I was learning that awareness could be just as powerful as manipulation. Weeks passed, each day adding more pieces to the puzzle. I learned the rhythm of her secret life, the time she met him, the purchases she made, the transfers she orchestrated. I began noticing patterns in her behavior at home, subtle tells that gave her away. A smile too quick, a glance diverted, a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. I catalogued these quietly, storing them for the time when action would be necessary. Then came the night I stumbled upon an email trail she had forgotten to delete. The correspondence was cold, transactional, devoid of emotion. Plans, strategies, financial calculations. Not love, not friendship control. She had been plotting, meticulously, a life that excluded me in ways I had not imagined. I didn't confront her immediately. I didn't yell, I didn't storm through the apartment. Instead, I let the knowledge settle like water through sand, slowly infiltrating every thought, every decision. I realized that the power she had relied upon, my ignorance, was no longer hers. I was awake, aware, and patient. The culmination of these nights of observation, documentation, and quiet preparation gave me clarity. I understood her methods, her patterns, her manipulations. I knew where she would strike, how she would deceive, and most importantly, where she was vulnerable. The realization didn't bring immediate satisfaction, only a deep, calculated resolve. And yet, despite everything, I felt a pang of sorrow, not for myself, but for what we had been, for the life I thought we shared, the trust that had been slowly eroded, and the love that had been misused. I sat alone that night, staring at the ceiling, knowing that the next steps required patience, intelligence, and a careful balance of emotion and strategy. The following day, she kissed me goodbye. She always did. I smiled back, said nothing, and left for work. Inside, I was no longer the man who had blindly trusted. I was awake. I was planning. I was ready. The following weeks became a test of patience and observation. I moved silently through our shared apartment, cataloging every action, every subtle shift in behavior. She continued to act as though nothing had changed, smiling, laughing, cooking meals with practiced ease. Yet I saw the cracks, teeny inconsistencies that revealed the dual life she had been leading for years. One evening, I discovered an envelope tucked behind a stack of papers on her desk. It wasn't hidden well, but she had assumed I would never look. Inside were receipts, hotel bookings, and bills for places I had never known. The handwriting was hers, precise and careful, masking transactions that involved someone outside our life. I studied each item meticulously, noting dates, amounts, and locations. It was as if she had constructed an invisible map of a life that existed alongside ours, one I was only now beginning to uncover. I realized I had to be cautious. Any sudden confrontation would alert her, and she was clever, calculating. She had controlled every financial detail for years. She had orchestrated a life in which I was unaware, yet fully dependent. I wasn't angry, not yet. Anger is impulsive and revealing. Patience, observation, and subtle planning were far more powerful at work. I maintained my routine, my colleagues unaware of the storm brewing in my personal life. I kept my focus sharp, using the day to gather my own evidence. I began noticing patterns. The times she left, the unusual calls she took, the way she avoided discussing certain purchases. Each detail added to the map I was quietly constructing, a map of her hidden life, and a guide for my eventual escape from manipulation. One night, curiosity led me further. I followed her discreetly as she left the apartment, claiming a casual outing across the city streets. She met the man I had seen before. They exchanged smiles, whispers, and small packets I could not identify. I didn't confront them. I watched, noting their behavior, their familiarity, their ease. It was a dance I had never been allowed to join, and now I observed from the shadows. Returning home, I felt a mix of emotions: betrayal, clarity, and a cautious excitement. Knowledge, I realized, was power, and with knowledge, I could reclaim control over my life. I began planning small steps, opening discrete accounts, documenting every discovery, and creating a timeline of her movements and transactions. Each detail was a thread, carefully pulled together to form a picture she could not obscure. The subtle signs of her manipulation became more pronounced. I noticed her laughter, slightly delayed, the way she glanced at her phone before speaking. To me, the careful phrasing of her words, designed to conceal and deflect. Every interaction became a test of observation. I was learning faster than she expected, quietly cataloging patterns, predicting her next moves. One night, while reviewing an old bank statement, I noticed a recurring transfer to a company I had never heard of. Curious, I traced the account, uncovering more hidden transactions. The deeper I delved, the more I realized the extent of her control. She had orchestrated a financial web in which I was blind, yet entirely ensnared. Each discovery fueled a growing determination to protect myself and reclaim my autonomy. At home, tension built without confrontation. She continued her life as usual, unaware that I had become a quiet observer, documenting and analyzing. I began noticing other details: unexplained bills, small gifts to unknown recipients, subtle discrepancies in receipts. Everything pointed to a hidden life, meticulously constructed, yet not impervious to discovery. I started to imagine my exit, not as an impulsive act, but as a calculated maneuver. Each day, I refined my plans, considering every possible scenario. I knew that confrontation would only make her more defensive, more manipulative. Patience and careful observation were my allies. Knowledge had made me strong in a way anger never could. The turning point came unexpectedly. A phone call, left unanswered, revealed her anxiety in her messages. The man she had been meeting was pressing for something, and she was careful to mask her worry. I read between the lines, noticing the cracks in her otherwise impeccable control. She was human, she was fallible, and now I had the advantage she never expected: awareness. I spent nights planning my moves, legal advice, financial separation, small steps to reclaim autonomy. I didn't need to confront her directly. She had woven a life where she believed I was ignorant. I was awake. Each action I planned was deliberate, subtle, invisible. I realized that the most powerful revenge would not be confrontation, but reclaiming my life without her knowledge until it was too late for her to interfere. Evenings became a strange mixture of domestic normalcy and silent vigilance. She cooked meals, smiled, asked about my day. I responded, but my mind catalogued every gesture, every word. The house, once a place of comfort, had become a stage where I was quietly writing the script of my liberation. I was patient, observing, planning. The hidden world she had created would no longer be invisible to me. And yet, despite all the evidence, despite the betrayal, a pang of sorrow lingered. Not for myself, but for what we had been, the life I thought we shared, the love that had once felt mutual, and the trust that had been quietly eroded. I understood now that her life, hidden from me, had been built upon my faith. That realization brought clarity, not anger, and a steady resolve to act carefully when the time came. The following morning, she kissed me goodbye, smiling as though everything were normal. I returned the gesture, said nothing, and walked out. Inside, I was no longer naive. I was awake, I was aware. I was planning my next moves carefully, step by step toward freedom and clarity. The following days felt like walking through a house of mirrors. Every reflection I saw seemed familiar, yet distorted. My home, once a sanctuary of comfort and trust, had transformed into a labyrinth of observation and calculation. I noticed patterns I had ignored before: the way she handled receipts, the slight hesitation when a topic brushed against money, the carefully timed glances to see if I was paying attention. She thought her precision was invisible. I knew better late. One night I found myself in the living room, quietly sorting through files I had previously overlooked. Each document revealed layers of planning I hadn't imagined. Credit card statements under other names, transfers to accounts I had never heard of, payments to hotels and restaurants in cities far from our home. The scale of her secret life stunned me. It wasn't reckless or spontaneous, it was meticulous, well-planned and ongoing. I realized she had created two parallel lives, one with me, smiles, dinners, shared routines; one, hidden transactions, secret meetings, a life designed to exclude me. The realization was painful, yet empowering. Knowledge gave me clarity. Awareness became my strength. I began to see the subtle ways she had manipulated our daily life, the small emotional hooks she had used to ensure I remained oblivious. The next week, I decided to follow her again. I didn't need confrontation, I only needed to observe, when I understand the full extent of her network. Across the city, I watched her interact with a man I had seen before. They were casual, but not careless. Every movement, every gesture, revealed trust built outside our marriage, confidence she never showed me. I took careful notes, photographing receipts, noting times and locations. Each detail added to the growing map I was constructing of her double life. Returning home, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Anger, though present, was tempered by patience. Betrayal cut deep, yet clarity had sharpened my mind. I began preparing quietly for steps I would take to reclaim control over my life, my finances, and my sense of safety. Planning became almost meditative, a process that steadied my nerves while allowing me to analyze every potential outcome. I started noticing other subtle signs, small discrepancies in the bills she paid, unusual gifts she claimed were for friends, and moments when she seemed to check her phone secretly before answering me. Each observation was a clue. Each clue was another thread in the web she had woven, and now I was untangling it, methodically, one piece at a time. I also began reflecting on the past, on the foundation of our marriage. I remembered the first months, the excitement, the mutual promises, the sense of partnership. Now, it seemed almost naive, a veneer of love masking a carefully constructed hierarchy in which she controlled the flow of money, decisions, and secrets. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how cleverly she had built this illusion, and how powerful my awareness had become during these days. I also prepared my contingency plans. I opened discrete accounts in my name, transferred funds, slowly, and documented everything meticulously. I'd considered legal steps, though I knew confrontation would have to come later, carefully timed, precise, and untraceable. Each decision was deliberate, crafted to minimize risk while maximizing control over my own life. One evening, I found an unexpected message on her phone, an automated alert from a financial service she had set up without my knowledge. It contained a transfer to a location I didn't recognize, scheduled for the following week. I felt a chill. She believed everything was hidden, but now I had proof, timing, and opportunity. I could intervene quietly, without exposing my awareness prematurely. The subtle tension at home grew, though she remained oblivious. I smiled at her jokes, complimented her meals, and asked about her day, all while cataloging every word, gesture, and detail. The observation had become a second nature, and the apartment felt less like a home and more like a stage where I silently directed the unfolding drama. Then came the evening that shifted everything. She left for a supposed dinner with a friend I followed cautiously, careful to remain unnoticed. Across the city streets, she met the man again, handing over envelopes, exchanging smiles, whispering quietly. I noted every detail, the timing, the body language, the careful secrecy. She had underestimated my awareness, and for the first time, I realized I had an advantage she hadn't anticipated. Back at home, I reflected on what I had learned. She was clever, meticulous, and dangerous, but not infallible. Each secret she thought hidden was slowly being uncovered. Each lie she assumed I hadn't noticed was now documented and analyzed and understood. Knowledge had transformed me from a naive participant to a patient strategist. I spent the rest of the night planning, reviewing, and organizing my findings. I didn't want confrontation yet. That would be premature. I needed to wait for the right moment, to act at a time of my choosing, armed with evidence and awareness. The balance of power had shifted quietly, subtly, but irrevocably. By the end of the week, I felt a cautious satisfaction. She continued her life unaware, smiling, cooking, maintaining the illusion of normalcy. I remained vigilant, my mind cataloging, planning, and preparing. I realized that freedom would not come through anger or confrontation. It would come through careful strategy, observation, and the patient reclaiming of my life. The days blurred into weeks, each one a careful study of her habits, her routines, and the hidden intricacies of her double life. I moved silently through the apartment, noting everything she touched, every subtle glance, every whispered conversation she had on the phone when she thought I wasn't paying attention. The home we had once shared with ease now felt like a theater of secrets, each corner hiding evidence of her meticulous planning. I began spending more hours at the dining table after she had gone to bed, sifting through documents I had previously overlooked, receipts for dinners in cities I had never visited, transfers to accounts I couldn't trace, invoices for services that had no explanation. Each page revealed a layer of deception, a carefully constructed web of secrecy that extended far beyond what I had first imagined. She had built an entire parallel life, a world that excluded me entirely, yet relied on my ignorance to function. I realized that confrontation at this stage would be reckless. She was clever, precise, and practiced in manipulation. If I acted prematurely, she would retreat, cover her tracks, and I would lose the advantage I had painstakingly gained. So I remained patient, quietly observing, cataloging, and strategizing. Every gesture she made, every casual word, became a clue in the unfolding puzzle. One afternoon I noticed an unusual pattern. She frequently left for brief periods in the middle of the day, claiming errands or casual visits with friends. Curiosity pushed me to follow her discreetly. Across familiar streets, she met the man I had seen before, their interactions subtle but intimate. They exchanged papers, shared whispered laughs, and moved with a practiced familiarity that made my blood run cold. I didn't confront them. I simply watched, committing every detail to memory. Returning home, I felt the strange mixture of betrayal and clarity. Betrayal for the trust she had taken for granted. Clarity because awareness had shifted the power dynamic. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger is visible, impulsive, and dangerous. Knowledge is quiet, potent, and enduring. Each observation, each documented transaction, gave me strength and a sense of control I had never felt before. I began to prepare, in earnest. Discrete bank accounts, detailed logs of financial transactions, photographs of receipts, and communications all organized carefully. I was building a private arsenal of evidence and strategy designed to protect myself and reclaim my autonomy. The realization that she had underestimated my ability to observe and plan fueled my resolve. Her behavior at home became more transparent. Small gestures betrayed her subtle anxiety, delayed responses to my questions, the fleeting glance toward her phone, the way she avoided discussing certain purchases. Each micro-expression, each minor slip, became proof of the secret world she thought I would never see. I cataloged them meticulously, knowing that every detail would be valuable when the time came to act out. One night, I discovered another layer of her hidden life. A set of emails she had forgotten to delete revealed discussions with the man I had seen multiple times. Their correspondence was transactional, devoid of emotion, focused solely on logistics, transfers, and plans that bypassed me entirely. It became clear that I had been an observer in my own life, unwittingly supporting the structure she had built to maintain control over both our shared finances and her secret endeavors. Evenings became exercises in duality. Outwardly, I smiled, complimented her cooking, asked about her day. Inwardly, I cataloged, analyzed, and strategized. Observation had become second nature. Your apartment, once a place of comfort, had transformed into the control center of my careful surveillance. Every detail was noted, every anomaly recorded, every behavior analyzed. I was awake now, fully, and she had no idea. As the days passed, I realized that my own emotions had changed. The initial shock had been replaced by a steady determination. The betrayal no longer hurt the way it had in the first days. It sharpened my awareness and honed my patience. Each detail of her manipulation, Each secret uncovered became a tool I could wield silently, invisibly. Freedom would not come through confrontation. It would come through careful observation, meticulous planning, and strategic action. Then came the night that shifted everything. She left for what she claimed was a casual dinner. I followed her, careful to remain unseen, noting the exact locations, times, and interactions. Across the dimly lit streets, she met him again. This time, I saw the exchange more clearly: documents, envelopes, whispered words. Their confidence, ease, and intimacy were startling, but they had not accounted for my awareness. I returned home quietly, my mind racing with possibilities and plans. Sitting alone in the quiet of the apartment, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here, the trust I had given freely, the love I had believed in, the partnership I had assumed existed. All had been quietly manipulated, but now knowledge had replaced ignorance, observation had replaced naivety. I was no longer a victim. I was aware, alert, and ready. The following morning, she kissed me goodbye, smiling as always, unaware that I had followed her, observed her, and documented her actions. I returned the gesture, said nothing, and left for work. Inside, I was no longer the man who had trusted blindly. I was patient, deliberate, and fully aware of the next steps I would take to reclaim my life and autonomy. The weeks blurred together, each day a careful balance of routine and observation. I moved through the apartment as if nothing had changed, but every small action, every whispered word from her, was catalogued and analyzed. The life I had believed we shared was slowly revealing its fractures, hidden beneath the veneer of daily normalcy. She still smiled, cooked dinner, asked about my day, but I no longer trusted the gestures. I had learned that appearances could be meticulously maintained, even when built on deception. Late one evening, I found myself reviewing a stack of receipts and statements that I had gathered over the past month. Transfers to accounts I couldn't recognize, invoices for hotels and restaurants I had never visited, small sums sent to unknown individuals, all meticulously documented. Each line told a story, each figure a hidden narrative. It became clear that she had been orchestrating this hidden life for years, carefully building it while ensuring I remained oblivious. I realized the depth of her cunning. She wasn't reckless or careless, she was meticulous and strategic. Every payment had a purpose, every meeting a plan, every smile calculated to maintain the illusion of normalcy. I felt a strange mixture of admiration and anger. Admiration for the precision, anger at being deceived, but I buried the anger beneath a calm exterior, knowing that patience was my greatest ally. One night, while she was out, I followed the trail of a transaction to a small, unassuming apartment in the city. Across the street, I watched her meet the man I had observed multiple times before. They exchanged envelopes, whispered softly, and laughed quietly. The familiarity between them was unmistakable, yet there was an air of caution, as though they were aware of the risks. I remained hidden, noting every detail, every movement, every subtle gesture that revealed the depth of their connection. Returning home, I felt the steady pulse of determination. I wasn't going to act rashly or confront her blindly. Every piece of evidence I collected, every observation I made, was another step toward reclaiming control over my life. I began organizing my findings, creating a detailed map of a hidden world, noting patterns, timings, and locations. Each day, I became more confident, more methodical, more aware, even at home. Her small gestures betrayed cracks in her composure, a delayed response to a question, a fleeting glance toward her phone, a hesitation before answering all became pieces of the puzzle. I noted them carefully, aware that these subtle details could provide the leverage I would need when the time came. Observation had become instinct, and the apartment had transformed into the control center of my silent investigation. I also reflected on the emotional toll. Betrayal, fear, and sorrow intertwined with determination, creating a complex emotional landscape. I realized that the strength to act would not come from anger but from patience, strategy, and careful planning. Knowledge had shifted the balance of power. I was no longer blind, no longer naive, no longer a passive participant. I was awake, aware, and ready. Then came a breakthrough. I discovered a series of scheduled transfers to accounts under her name, but with details I connected to the man she had been meeting. The amounts were small individually, but collectively, they revealed a pattern: planned, ongoing, deliberate. She believed she had hidden her activities perfectly, but the pattern was unmistakable. I now had concrete evidence of a double life, a confirmation of the suspicions that had kept me awake for weeks. I spent the next few nights planning my next steps carefully. Every move had to be calculated. I opened additional accounts, documented every interaction, and considered legal and personal strategies to protect myself. She had assumed control over our finances, but I was quietly reclaiming autonomy, building a web of preparation she could not foresee. As the days passed, the tension at home became palpable. Though she remained unaware of my awareness, she continued her routines, smiled, and acted as though our life was untouched. I, however, had become a strategist, silently orchestrating a plan to reclaim my life. Each day brought new insights, new evidence, and new opportunities to prepare for the inevitable confrontation or escape. One evening she left for another supposed dinner with her friend. I followed discreetly, noting her route, her timing, her interactions. Across a quiet street, she met him again. Their conversation was brief but intimate, and I observed the subtle ways they exchanged information. It was clear now that her hidden life was intricate, structured, and ongoing. I returned home quietly, the image of their partnership imprinted in my mind, each detail catalogued for future use. That night, as I sat alone in the dim light of the apartment, I realized something important. My life no longer depended on her honesty, her affection, or even her presence. I had become aware, prepared, and empowered. The next steps would not be impulsive. They would be deliberate, strategic, and carefully executed. And when the time came, I would act not out of rage, but from a position of undeniable knowledge and control. The apartment had become a quiet battlefield, each corner holding secrets I had uncovered, each gesture from her a clue to the life she had hidden. I moved through our shared space with precision, cataloging, analyzing, and planning my next steps. She smiled at me, cooked dinner, and asked about my day, completely unaware that I had become a patient strategist, observing every subtle detail of her behavior. One afternoon while she was at work, I followed the trail of another transaction. It led me to a small, nondescript building in the city center. From a distance, I watched as she met him again. They exchanged documents, whispered quickly, and shared a brief, intimate laugh. It was clear that the web she had built extended far beyond what I had initially imagined. Every meeting, every transfer, every hidden communication revealed layers of a life I had never been permitted to see. Returning home, I felt the weight of both betrayal and clarity. The anger I had felt in the first days had subsided, replaced by calm observation and deliberate planning. I knew that acting impulsively would be dangerous. She was clever, meticulous, and practiced in deception. I needed patience, precision, and strategy. Every day, every observation, was a step toward reclaiming my autonomy. I began documenting everything meticulously. Each transaction, each meeting, each subtle gesture at home was recorded, categorized, and analyzed. I was building an undeniable, a detailed map of her hidden life that would leave no room for doubt. This wasn't about revenge. It was about survival, clarity, and control. I had been blindsided once, but not again. Late one night, I discovered a folder she had forgotten to secure. It contained email correspondence between her and the man, financial details, and personal messages that revealed the depth of their relationship. Her life, hidden from me for years, was now laid bare in my hands. I didn't feel the need to confront her immediately. Observation and preparation had become my tools, and patience was my ally. The subtle signs at home grew more pronounced. Hesitation in his speech, brief glances toward her phone, micro-expressions that betrayed concealed worry. Each detail was noted, adding to the growing map of her secret life. I realized that while she had been careful, she was not infallible. The meticulous control she had relied upon could be undone by patience, awareness, and careful planning. I spent the following days strengthening my strategy. Legal research, financial preparations, and personal plans for independence consumed my evenings. I opened discrete accounts, transferred funds incrementally, and documented everything. Each action was deliberate, a step toward reclaiming control over my life without alerting her to my awareness. I was no longer a passive participant. I had become an observer, a planner, a strategist. Then came the night that changed everything. She left for a late meeting, claiming it was work-related. I followed discreetly, noting every turn, every pause, every interaction. Across a quiet street, she met him again. Their familiarity was unmistakable, yet they moved with caution. Aware of their surroundings, I observed silently, cataloging their gestures, their exchange of documents, and the intimacy they shared. Each detail strengthened my understanding, each observation a step closer to reclaiming my life. Returning home, I reflected on the emotional toll of these weeks. Betrayal, sorrow, and disappointment intertwined with determination and clarity. I realized that freedom would not come through confrontation but through careful, deliberate action. Knowledge had shifted the balance of power. I was no longer naive, no longer blind, no longer a passive participant in a life orchestrated without my awareness. I spent nights planning my next steps, considering every potential scenario. I organized the evidence, outlined my options, and visualized my escape from the manipulation that had defined our shared life. She had assumed my ignorance would protect her, but now the power had shifted quietly, irrevocably. I was aware, prepared, and ready. Finally, I understood the key to reclaiming my life: patience, strategy, and careful execution. Anger or confrontation would be useless. Only methodical observation, meticulous documentation, and deliberate planning could give me the control I needed. The moment was approaching when I would act not impulsively, but with undeniable knowledge and power. The city lights outside our apartment flickered like distant stars, a constant reminder that the world moved on even as I navigated the secrets that had consumed my life. Each night I found myself awake long after she had fallen asleep, reviewing evidence, piecing together patterns, and anticipating her next moves. The apartment, once a place of comfort, had become a silent battlefield, each room a territory where awareness and observation held sway. I noticed the smallest details: how she touched her phone, the hesitation before she answered, the faint traces of perfume not her own. Each observation was a thread, slowly weaving a tapestry of her double life. I documented everything meticulously: times, dates, movements, expressions. The man she had been meeting repeatedly was no longer just a shadow in my mind. He was a clear, undeniable presence, one that intersected with her life in ways I had only begun to understand. One evening I discovered another envelope tucked behind a dresser. Inside were receipts for a series of gifts, transfers, and small cash withdrawals, all carefully disguised. The precision of her planning astonished me. She had orchestrated a life that existed entirely alongside ours, meticulously hiding the financial and emotional truths. Yet her careful strategist had overlooked one critical factor: my awareness. I began following her more systematically. Every meeting, every phone call, every unusual transaction was noted and analyzed. Across the city streets, I watched the familiar exchanges between her and the man, the whispers, the envelopes, the subtle laughter that betrayed intimacy. I never confronted them. I simply observed, letting patience guide me. Each detail became ammunition for the eventual reclaiming of my life. Back at home, the tension was almost imperceptible. She continued her routines, smiling, cooking, laughing, blissfully unaware of the silent observer in her midst. I returned her gestures, asked about her day, and complimented her meals. Outwardly, the apartment remained a sanctuary of normalcy. Inwardly, I was cataloging, plotting, and preparing. Observation had become second nature. Awareness had become power. Weeks passed, each day adding more clarity. I traced every hidden account, every unusual transfer, every secret meeting. Patterns emerged, a rhythm to her deception became clear. She had assumed I would remain ignorant forever, but I was no longer the man who trusted blindly. I was awake, methodical, and ready to reclaim control. The breaking point approached silently, like the calm before a storm. One evening I discovered an email she had forgotten to delete. Its contents were indisputable: plans, transfers, and evidence of her ongoing liaison. She had been careful, but not infallible. I now held the proof I needed. The realization did not fill me with rage. It filled me with clarity. Knowledge had given me strength. Observation had given me power. I spent nights preparing for the inevitable moment. I organized accounts, documented interactions, and devised a plan for reclaiming both my autonomy and my freedom. Confrontation would not be reckless, it would be deliberate, precise, and undeniable. I understood her patterns, her routines, and her vulnerabilities. I was ready. Then came the night I decided it was time to act, not with confrontation, but with quiet resolution. She left for what she claimed was a dinner with a friend. I followed discreetly, noting every detail, every turn, every whispered word between her and the man. Across the street, the exchange was unmistakable: envelopes, furtive glances, a laughter that revealed intimacy. I watched silently, storing every detail, committing everything to memory for the final steps of my plan. Returning home, I felt the first taste of liberation. The anger that had once consumed me had transformed into calm determination. The sorrow I had felt was replaced by clarity. I was no longer at the mercy of her deception. Knowledge had shifted the balance of power. Patience and careful planning had brought me to this point, where I could act deliberately and decisively. For the first time in weeks, I slept with a sense of control. The apartment, once a stage for deception, had become my command center. Observation, strategy, and preparation had placed me in a position of strength. The final step, the ultimate reclaiming of my life, was near. I understood now that freedom would not come through anger or confrontation alone. It would come through patience, preparation, and careful execution. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow on the apartment that had become my observation post. Today felt different, heavier with anticipation, yet sharper with clarity. I had spent weeks quietly mapping her secret world, tracking every detail, and the final pieces were now in place. I no longer felt fear, only a calm certainty. The knowledge I had accumulated was power, and it was time to use it wisely. She moved through the apartment with her usual grace, smiling, laughing, pretending that nothing had changed. but I could see the small cracks beginning to show hesitation before answering my questions. A quick glance at her phone, a subtle shift in posture. She was still unaware that I knew everything. I let the facade continue, allowing her confidence to grow while I quietly prepared my exit. I reviewed my documentation one last time. Receipts, emails, photographs, bank statements, patterns, all organized, all clear, all undeniable. Her hidden life was fully mapped, and the control she had assumed over me had evaporated. I realized that confrontation was unnecessary. The strongest move would be silent, reclaiming, walking away on my own terms, leaving her world intact only for her to discover the truth when it was too late. That evening she left for another supposed dinner, and I watched from a distance as she met him, the man who had shared her secret life for so long. Their gestures, their whispers, and the envelopes they exchanged were familiar now, and I observed without emotion, without haste. Each detail was absorbed, stored for reference, a final confirmation of everything I already knew. Returning home, I packed discreetly. Clothes, documents, financial records, everything necessary for my independence. Each item I packed symbolized freedom, a reclamation of autonomy that had been denied for years. I moved silently, deliberately, leaving no trace that would betray my awareness until it was too late for her to interfere. I left a simple note on the table, unsigned. No accusations, no anger, no confrontation, just clarity, a silent message that the life I had shared with her was over, reclaimed by the one she had underestimated. The apartment, once a stage for deception, was now empty of my presence, though full of the truth she could no longer conceal. Walking into the night, I felt a sense of liberation I had not experienced for years. The city light stretched ahead, a promise of freedom, opportunity, and the ability to rebuild a life on my own terms. Each step was deliberate, a quiet affirmation that I had survived, observed, and acted wisely. I had been patient, and patience had delivered power. She would discover the truth in time, evidence she had assumed was hidden, a life she had assumed I was ignorant of. But by then, I would be gone, fully independent, and fully aware. I had not acted out of revenge, but out of necessity, wisdom, and clarity. The lessons of deception, observation, and strategy had transformed me. I was no longer a victim. I was awakened, empowered, and free. As I walked away, I whispered to the night, knowledge is power, patience is strength, and freedom is mine. The city embraced me, and for the first time, I felt entirely in control. The story of betrayal and hidden lives had ended, not with confrontation, but with quiet triumph. And to everyone watching this story unfold, wherever you are, thank you for joining me. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with your loved ones, because awareness and patience can change everything.